Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the MTB podcast. It's February 5th, 2025, and given everything that's been happening in the United States during the past 2 weeks, I wanted to share with you the audio from a live stream presentation I gave the other night. It was a Monday masterclass on courage in a time of fear. I believe it's a topic that we need to talk about because half the country is terrified right now. Many of the other half seem to be gleeful with the dismantling of our democracy and its institutions. And yet I'm seeing more and more stories of the folks on that side starting to think that maybe they made a mistake. For federal employees and contractors, most of whom have dedicated their working lives to serving this country to the best of their ability for years, this whole situation is utterly terrifying, and most of them have no idea what to do. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I felt it was important to share some of my thoughts and a bit of encouragement with anyone willing to listen. And so, without further ado, please enjoy this special episode of the MTB podcast, Courage in a Time of Fear. So tonight, we're going to have, like I said, a Monday masterclass. I want to focus entirely on the topic of courage, and specifically courage in a time of fear. But when I say courage, I'm not just talking about like big, bold, public acts of defiance that we often associate with bravery. And instead, I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the quiet, strategic, and I guess deeply personal ways we can stand firm in our values without recklessly endangering ourselves or our livelihoods. We are in an extremely difficult moment right now. The federal government in the United States is rapidly dismantling safeguards, targeting marginalized communities, and consolidating power in ways that really point toward autocracy. Many of us feel trapped between wanting to fight back and needing to protect ourselves and our families. So tonight, I'm going to be exploring what courage actually looks like in this moment. How can we resist in ways that are effective without making ourselves too vulnerable to retaliation? Right? How do we prepare for what may be an even darker future while staying engaged and active right now? It's not about easy answers, but it is about helping each other face our fears. It's about building resilience, and it's about taking meaningful action in ways that align with our individual risks and responsibilities. So let's talk a little bit about courage. It's one of those values we all admire, but in times like these, it feels more essential than ever. And let's be honest, like I said, these are some scary times for a lot of people right now. We have a president who has openly stated his intent to be a dictator on day one, and we're well past day one, and it's feeling like it just continues to get worse. And lots of people laughed that off as, that was just, bluster. But here we are, right? Barely 2 weeks into this administration, and we're watching what seems to be the dismantling of institutions that we once believed were stable and almost untouchable. I mean, the IGs, inspector generals, are being fired. Checks and balances are being just bulldozed. Diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives are being erased. They've been demonized. Protections under the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act, well, they could be next. Everything that once seemed like a given, basic fairness, accountability, the idea that the law applies to everyone, it all suddenly feels like it's really under attack. That's why courage is the perfect value to explore tonight, because courage isn't just about grand, dramatic acts. Courage is about It's about choosing to stand firm when the world is shaking. It's about knowing that fear is real, but then refusing to let it make our choices for us, refusing to let fear make our choices for us. But what does it actually mean to be courageous? So tonight, I want to spend some time exploring courage as a virtue, maybe look at some of its philosophical roots, and then talk about how we can cultivate it in the face of uncertainty. When we think about courage, we often picture, warriors, revolutionaries, or people performing these daring acts of heroism. And while these are certainly real examples of courage, courage isn't just for the battlefield. Courage is a daily practice. The Stoics, some of the greatest philosophers when it comes to the ideas of resilience, well, they believed that courage is the foundation of a good life. They categorized it as one of the 4 cardinal virtues, alongside justice, temperance, and wisdom. And they argued that courage isn't just an option in hard times. It's necessary all the time. Courage is necessary to live well. And for the Stoics, courage wasn't about being fearless, because they knew that fear is natural. Fear it's a part of being human. But courage is about acting in spite of fear. It's about choosing integrity over comfort, about choosing action over passivity. Take Seneca, the Roman philosopher and statesman. He wrote about courage in the face of tyranny. He lived under the rule of Emperor Nero, one of history's most ruthless autocrats. Instead of bending to fear, Seneca tried to guide Nero, the emperor, toward wisdom. When that failed, he chose to face his forced suicide with composure and dignity. For him, courage wasn't about fighting to the death. It was about standing firm in the face of corruption and doing what was right, even when it cost him everything. Then there's the Stoic teacher Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the greatest Stoic teachers. He taught that true freedom comes from within. A former slave taught that true freedom comes from within, not from wealth or power, but from the ability to control how we respond to fear and hardship. Epictetus said, "Courage stands halfway between cowardice and recklessness." And what he meant was it's not about acting without thought. Right? It's not about being reckless, but it's also not about hiding from difficulty. It's about stepping up when it's needed, despite the risks. So, okay, great. Historical Stoic philosophers back in Roman times, but what does it mean for us right now? Well, courage isn't always, like I said, about these grand gestures. It's not just standing in front of tanks or making viral speeches. Sometimes courage is quieter, but it can be just as powerful. Courage is speaking up when you hear misinformation, even when it's uncomfortable to do so. Courage is standing firm in your values when others are pressuring you to just go along to get along. Courage is showing up. It's continuing to advocate for justice, for fairness, for truth, even when it feels like the battle is endless. Courage is protecting others, whether that's fighting for someone's rights to work or at work, supporting marginalized communities, or it could be simply offering a safe place for people to share their fears and their concerns. That can be courage as well. But let's flip the question. What happens when courage is abandoned? Well, history shows us the cost of inaction. Every authoritarian regime thrives not just on brutality, but on fear-induced silence. It wasn't just the loudest voices that allowed Hitler or Mussolini or any other dictator to seize power. It was the quiet compliance of ordinary people. The moment we let fear dictate our actions, the moment we decide it's safer to stay silent, to do that to avoid rocking the boat, and then we just start to turn a blind eye on injustice. The minute we do that, we become part of the machine that enables corruption. That's why courage is necessary, because without it, the only people who get their way are the ones who are already in power. But the great thing about courage, it's not something we're born with or without. It's something we cultivate. And in times like these, when fear is so widespread, practicing courage, even in small ways, practicing courage matters more than ever. Tonight, everything we discuss will come back to this. How do we choose courage in a post-truth world? A world where powerful people just lie openly, where institutions we trusted are crumbling, where fear is being used as a tool to keep people compliant. How do we choose courage? Because at the end of the day, courage isn't just about surviving these times. It's about making sure we emerge from them stronger, maybe bolder, definitely more determined to create something better. So let's dig into that. Let's look at what courage looks like in action, and let's remind ourselves that even when we feel small, even when we feel powerless, choosing courage again and again and again, that's what'll make the difference. So let's take a deep breath, right? Seriously, right now, wherever you are, take a deep breath, just slowly inhale and let it out. Because let's be honest, for so many people right now, these are terrifying times. And I don't say that lightly. I'm not trying to be melodramatic. But I don't say it to try to scare you either. But we're not going to sugarcoat reality here. We are watching institutions that once felt solid crumble in real time. The checks and balances we assumed would hold, we assumed that they're being dismantled. The rules and laws we thought were unbreakable, they're just being ignored. And many of us are feeling something we never expected to feel in our own country, in the United States. We feel absolutely powerless. And that fear, it's justified. If you're feeling exhausted, angry, or just numb, well, you're not alone. Don't feel like you're alone. And these are completely normal reactions to watching democracy erode in front of your very eyes. But here's the thing. Here's the thing I want you to keep in mind. Fear is only dangerous if we let it take over. Fear is a survival instinct. It's our body's way of saying, oh, hey, things are bad. You need to be alert. And that's useful. But when fear turns into paralysis, right, when it convinces us that nothing we do matters, that's when fear becomes a weapon in the hands of those who want power. Let me tell you what every autocratic regime in history has relied upon. Silence. And not just forced silence, but the kind of silence that grows naturally out of fear. Right? Because fear makes people withdraw. Fear makes people keep their heads down. Fear convinces people that speaking up isn't worth the risk. And the people tearing this country apart, they know this. They count on it. They don't need to jail every dissenter. They just need enough people to feel too afraid to act at all. Think about it. How many times in the last 2 weeks alone have you caught yourself thinking, what's the point? Nothing I do will change this. Or, some of us, if I say something, will I lose my job? Or, I just need to focus on surviving. If so, if you've felt that, let me assure you that is not a personal failure. In fact, that's the natural response to conditioning. It's what happens when fear is weaponized. The scariest part is that it works. People, they start to censor themselves. They become afraid to push back at all, and then they eventually go numb. And over time, that becomes the new normal. Now, let me be clear. I'm not encouraging you to be reckless. I'm not saying you need to throw yourself in front of a train just to prove a point. Courage isn't about charging forward blindly. Courage is about choosing your battles wisely. If you disagree with what's going on in this country right now, you have a right to express your disagreement. However, when the opposition isn't afraid to break the rules, isn't afraid to ignore due process and seems hell-bent on retaliating against anyone who disagrees with them, then wisdom is the better part of valor. You don't need to lunge headfirst into a battle that could have some serious repercussions for you. So here's one thing I would hope everyone would understand. There is a difference between fear-based silence and strategic silence. Fear-based silence is giving up. It's thinking, this is too big, I can't do anything, and just shutting down. Strategic silence is choosing when and where to speak up so that your words and actions have real impact. As I said, courage isn't just about big public acts of defiance. Sometimes courage is knowing when to lay low, when to gather resources and build strength for the fight ahead. Sometimes courage is talking to one person, a friend, a coworker, a family member, about what's really happening. Sometimes courage is choosing where to put your energy, because you can't fight every battle, but you can fight the ones that matter most. Sometimes courage is just not giving in to despair, because despair is exactly what they want. And for most federal employees right now, most civil servants who swore to uphold the Constitution, right now, courage is finding a way to keep your job without completely abandoning your core values. Courage doesn't have to be loud or flashy. It's resistance in any form. And right now, any form of resistance matters. Look, acknowledging fear is essential. We have to. Fear exists. But letting it paralyze us, that's how oppression wins. So let's be real. We don't have all the answers. If we did, we'd be solving everything right now. We don't know exactly what's coming next. But here's what we do know. We do know that fear is real, but it doesn't have to control us. We do know that fear is natural, but it shouldn't make us give up. And we know that fear is powerful, but only if we let it win. History has shown us time and time again, fear is the tool of the oppressor, and courage, real, practical, strategic courage, that's the tool of the resistance. So as we move forward through the rest of this conversation, let's think about how we can be courageous in ways that keep us safe, that keep us effective, and keep us fighting for the world we believe in. Because the moment we stop believing that we can fight, that's when they've won. And we are not going to let that happen. So let's talk about something that's been weighing on a lot of people's minds, right? It's that question that I put out earlier. What does courage really look like right now? A lot of us feel this pressure, this expectation that if we're not out there in the streets, if we're not loudly speaking out on social media, if we're not taking massive risks, then we're somehow not doing enough. That can be really dangerous thinking, especially for those of us who simply can't afford to put ourselves in harm's way right now. Here's the truth, though. Courage comes in many forms. It's not just about the big visible acts, right? I keep saying that. Yes, there's a time to march, there's a time to protest, there's a time to make public statements, but that's not all the time, and it's not necessarily for everybody. It's also about the quieter, more strategic choices we make every day. It's about deciding where and how we engage so that we don't burn out, so that we don't put our livelihoods or our safety on the line unnecessarily. The reality is sustained resistance. Right? Sustained resistance is what changes the course of history. Not reckless action, not just martyrdom. And that means we need to be smart. We need to think long term. So for the next few minutes, we're going to talk about the many different ways to be courageous. I'm going to try to unpack what it means to stand up for what's right without making ourselves too easy of a target. Because honestly, even the smallest, quietest actions can be revolutionary. I've mentioned this already, but I really want to make sure that I clear this up. Silence isn't always cowardice. In a perfect world, we'd all be able to speak our minds openly. We'd be able to challenge injustice wherever we see it and never worry about the consequences. I hate to break it to you, but we don't live in that world. We don't live in that perfect world. We live in a world where employers can fire you for unrelated reasons if they don't like what you say, where a world where online mobs and trolls can make you unemployable. We live in a world where speaking out can have serious life-altering consequences. So let's just be real about this. Courage isn't just about speaking up. It's about knowing when to speak up and where to take action. If speaking out at work could result in being fired, demoted, or even placed on the boss's shit list, then staying silent in that space while finding other ways to act is not weakness, it's strategy. There is no honor in martyring yourself for a cause if it means you completely lose your ability to contribute in the long run. If you get fired for calling out injustice at work, what happens? You're out of a job and the company replaces you with someone who won't challenge them. What did that accomplish? Now you may be able to find smaller ways, to slowly push within the company. You might be able to talk to certain people. You might be able to but you can't steer the ship if you've been thrown overboard. You need to know your rights. Before taking any action, you need to understand your rights and the limits of those rights. Some companies have explicit policies about political expression, and violating them, even for a good cause, can get you fired. Federal employees and civil servants have clear guidelines around this in good times. But these aren't good times. These are unprecedented times, especially for civil servants. When we have now become the villain of this story. At least in this country, and during our lifetimes, these are unprecedented times. So civil servants need to be extra careful. Other companies will find subtle ways to retaliate, even if what you said was technically protected. Maybe you get passed over for a promotion. Maybe your workload mysteriously doubles, or maybe you just start getting written up for minor things that never used to be an issue. If you decide to speak up, if that's the way that you express your courage, then you need to document everything and keep emails, take notes, track conversations. If retaliation happens, a solid paper trail might be the difference between winning a legal case or having no recourse at all. Let me be really clear, though. This is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. I'm sharing some common sense ideas that could be helpful. And one of those ideas is that I think you should not hesitate to contact a lawyer if you believe you've been improperly targeted by your employer. The courts may be our last line of defense. Anyway, if speaking up in one space isn't safe, find another way to act. Are there community groups you can join? Sometimes the best way to affect change in your workplace or local community is from the outside, if you've got a group of people who are working on that. Can you talk to trusted colleagues privately? And if you're feeling uneasy about what's happening at work, chances are others are too. The quiet, behind-the-scenes conversations can lead to collective action, which is often safer and more effective than going it alone. Are there ways to push for ethical practices from within? Maybe you're in a position where you can influence policy or hiring practices or even workplace culture in subtle but meaningful ways. These incremental changes, they can have lasting effects. I want everyone, though, to understand silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's about choosing your battles wisely. It's about recognizing where you have power, where you don't, and where you can be most effective without sacrificing yourself in the process. If you can't fight in one space, find another. Courage is about strategy, not self-destruction. Courage isn't just about shouting from the rooftops. Sometimes it's about having quiet, meaningful conversations behind closed doors. Right now, one of the biggest threats we face isn't just the people actively pushing for authoritarianism. It's the people who are disengaged. It's the people who assume everything's fine because they don't feel personally affected yet. And unfortunately, that's still a lot of people. I have a feeling that within a short amount of time, it might be a lot of people who feel personally affected, but not at the moment. But history shows us that change often starts in small, personal conversations. Before any major movement ever made headlines, there were conversations happening in living rooms, in coffee shops, in workplaces. Resistance doesn't begin with mass protests. It begins with people talking to people. These conversations matter. Many people, they genuinely don't grasp how serious things are right now. Maybe they're too busy surviving in their own lives to follow politics closely. Maybe they assume that everything will work itself out. It always has in the past, in my lifetime. Maybe they think, this doesn't affect me, so I don't need to worry about it. But by the time they realize what's happening, it might be too late. This is where you and I come in. Having conversations with family, friends, it normalizes discussions about the current political landscape. It makes it real for people who might otherwise just tune it out. And if you have friends or relatives who think they're safe, talking to them now, before they're personally affected, could be what prevents them from becoming completely passive enablers of authoritarianism. This isn't about arguing or forcing anyone to agree with you. It's about planting seeds of awareness. Sometimes just one thoughtful conversation can make someone start questioning things that they've been ignoring. The idea is to find allies that you can trust. You don't have to be alone in your concerns. There are others out there who feel the same way. Whether it's coworkers, neighbors, old friends, or people in online communities. Finding like-minded individuals gives you a sense of community and shared strength. And don't underestimate the power of private, behind-the-scenes resistance. Many historical movements, from the civil rights to LGBTQ plus activism, many historical civil rights movements began with small groups of people meeting in secret, long before they ever went public. Those private networks laid the foundation for everything that came later. So it's like, okay, well, where do you start? All right, so look for local organizations. A lot of our cities have grassroots activism groups that don't require public exposure in order for you to participate. You can start a discussion group. Even something as simple as start a book club focused on democracy, on civil rights or activism. You do that. That can be a powerful tool for discussion and education. Find informal ways to connect. Sometimes resistance is just about keeping the conversation going. A group text, a weekly coffee meetup, a shared news article with a trusted friend. All of those things can make a difference. They all matter. Courage isn't just about big public actions. It's also about these private conversations, having the courage to reach out from one person to another. Having those private conversations, the more people who understand what's happening, the stronger the resistance becomes. And right now, we don't just need people willing to march in the streets. Right? We certainly do need that. We need people getting out there in front of the crowds, taking action. But that's not all we need. We need people willing to talk, willing to listen, willing to bring the conversations to others. That's how real change begins. Because let's be honest, not everyone is built for direct confrontation. And that's okay. Resistance is a team effort, and every single movement in history has been sustained not just by the visible leaders, but by the quiet supporters who kept things running behind the scenes. Even if you're not in a position to march in protests, to speak publicly or challenge injustice in these high-risk ways, you can still be an essential part of the fight. Courage doesn't just mean standing in front of a crowd. It can mean making sure those who do stand there aren't doing it alone. I mean, let's start with the most direct way to help. Right? Funding the people and the organizations who are fighting the battles on the front lines. If you can't fight yourself, then help financially fund the people who are. Legal battles are expensive, and the opposition is counting on that. They're counting on dragging this out. But groups like the ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, other advocacy organizations, they're constantly in court pushing back against oppressive policies. Grassroots activism, it runs on donations. Bail funds for arrested protesters. Think about how critical that can be. Mutual aid networks and local civil rights groups, they rely on financial support to keep going. Even small recurring donations make a huge difference. Too many people think, I can't afford to donate enough to matter. I can't put $250 million into something like Elon Musk can. But if hundreds or thousands of people chip in $5 or $10 a month to these different organizations, it adds up quickly. If you have the means, consider setting up a recurring donation. It provides stability to organizations that are fighting for our rights every single day. And remember that boosting the voices of the people who are speaking out, that's critical too. Not everyone can afford to be politically vocal on social media. Some people risk losing their jobs, their safety, or their peace of mind if they're too outspoken. But if you can't post about certain issues yourself, you can still try to amplify the voices of those who can. Right? Engage with their content online. Even simple things like sharing or commenting on a post boosts its visibility in the social media algorithms. Right? So even sharing articles and stories privately will do that. If you can't post publicly, send articles, podcasts, or video clips to friends and family in private messages. Use your privilege, whatever that is. If you're in a relatively safe position, right, professionally or socially, consider using your voice to advocate for those who are in more vulnerable positions. This is the digital age of holding the digital age version, right, of holding the megaphone for someone else. Every movement needs people who help spread the message, even if they aren't the ones standing at the podium. You can offer emotional and I'll lump it together, logistical support. The people who are actively fighting on the front lines, right? Protesters, organizers, journalists, whistleblowers, various community leaders, they are under enormous stress. Many of them are facing threats, burnout, and real personal risk. Even if you can't stand beside them in public, you can stand beside them in other ways. If you know people who are engaged on the front lines, well, check in on them. Seriously, a simple text message saying, "Hey, I appreciate what you're doing. How are you holding up?" That can mean the world to someone who is fighting this battle day in and day out and is starting to get burned out by it. You can offer a safe space, whether that means being someone they can vent to or literally offering them a place to stay if they're in danger. You can help with logistics, something as simple as cooking meals for exhausted activists, babysitting their kids, or helping them with transportation. That can take a huge weight off their shoulders. So there are all kinds of little ways like that. None of these things require you to take to the streets, but they make it possible for others to do that. Every form of courage matters. Courage isn't just about taking bold action. It's also about supporting those who do. The movements that shape history are built not just by the people in front of the cameras, but by countless others who are behind them, making sure everything keeps moving forward. Find the role that makes sense for you, because every act of support matters. Courage isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It doesn't always look like standing at a podium, leading a march, or shouting in the streets. Sometimes courage is quiet. Sometimes it happens in a private conversation, a behind-the-scenes strategy session, or a subtle but meaningful act of defiance. Those are probably, potentially, the more numerous acts of courage that we'll see. The key is to do something. Fear is real. And right now, fear is justified. But it doesn't have to paralyze us. The worst thing we can do is convince ourselves that we are absolutely powerless. We need to remember that action takes many forms. And maybe you're having hard conversations with friends and family. Maybe you're donating to activist causes. Maybe you're providing support to someone, who's out there taking greater risks than you can. All of that matters. And it's all courageous. If history has taught us anything, it's that change doesn't come from a single heroic act. It comes when ordinary people refuse to accept oppression as the status quo. So find your way to resist. Find your way to fight back. And do it with courage. This is where theory meets reality. So, take a moment to ask yourself and really spend some time thinking about it later. What can I do safely and effectively? What is one concrete action I can take this week? Maybe it's a donation. Maybe it's a conversation. Maybe it's researching your workplace policies to know where you stand. Whatever it is, choose one thing and commit to doing it. Because small actions build tremendous momentum. If we are moving toward a darker period in history, then courage alone won't be enough. We need resilience. We need the ability to keep going, even when it feels like the world is against us. We need the strength to adapt, to regroup, to fight another day. And that means preparing now, so that when the time comes to take action, we don't hesitate. Right now, many people feel like they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. The laws seem to be changing. The protections we thought were solid are crumbling. The people in power are daring us to challenge them. And while it's terrifying, history teaches us that this isn't the first time ordinary people have had to stand up against authoritarianism. And unfortunately, it won't be the last. So what can we do, right? How do we cultivate resilience so that fear doesn't paralyze us? How do we make sure we don't just survive this, but that we push back in ways that truly matter? So the first step, I think, is to build your strength now. Courage isn't something you just have when the time comes. You don't just have it when I need it. It's something, courage is something you build over time. Resistance isn't a spontaneous act. It's something you prepare for. So start building that inner strength now. You can learn from the past. History is full of people who resisted authoritarianism, often at great personal risk. But what strategies did they use? What worked? What didn't? Whether it was the underground resistant movements in Nazi-occupied Europe, the civil rights movements in the U.S., or modern-day dissidents in various oppressive regimes around the world. We have a lot to learn from those who came before us. You can cultivate mental resilience. And one of the best ways to build courage is through the study of Stoicism. It's a philosophy that teaches us to focus on what we can control, and accept what we can't, and then develop the discipline to act with integrity no matter the circumstances. The Stoics believed that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing what was right, even in the face of fear. So, to build that strength now, you can just practice. Practice small acts of bravery. Courage is, in essence, it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. So speak up maybe in small ways. Challenge misinformation when you hear it, especially on a personal level. Have a few difficult conversations. Maybe you've got some relatives. I've got relatives who definitely don't see things that I do. Maybe have some difficult conversations with folks like that. Strengthen your ability to act now so that if and when a major moment arises, you won't hesitate because you've been practicing these small acts of bravery. The more we prepare ourselves mentally and emotionally now, the more ready we'll be when courage is no longer optional, when courage is just absolutely necessary. The second thing we can do is understand our rights. One of the most terrifying things about living in an increasingly authoritarian state is not knowing where you stand legally. Laws just seem to be changing or ignored. Protections are being rolled back, and the people in power, they're definitely testing how far they can go before there's pushback. That's why knowledge is power. Know your workplace protections and their limits. And many workplaces have policies against discrimination, but some are vague when it comes to political speech. Others might retaliate. We talked about this earlier. Retaliate in ways that aren't immediately obvious by giving you worse assignments, isolating you from opportunities, or trying to create a paper trail that justifies firing you. If you know where your rights begin and end, you can navigate these situations a bit more strategically. You need to stay informed about legal changes. Boy, laws seem to be able to shift overnight these days. Policies that once protected you might be reversed without a whole lot of warning. Following organizations that track legal rights, especially those related to free speech, workers' rights, and civil liberties, well, that can help you stay ahead of the curve. Right? So find sources that you trust. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and disinformation is a weapon that authoritarian regimes use to keep people confused and afraid. And so stick with reputable organizations that specialize in protecting rights. Groups like the ACLU, the NAACP, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, among plenty of others, they provide clear, well-researched information on how to resist within the boundaries of the law. So the more courage you build, the more courageous you become, you may be able to push the boundaries further, but you need to stay within the boundaries of the law. The bottom line is that the more informed we are, the harder it is for those in power to manipulate us. The third thing you can do is strengthen your support systems. No one fights alone, and no one should fight alone. If we're going to resist what's coming, we need to build strong networks of support. So Find like-minded people, whether it's an activist group, a discussion circle, a private chat with trusted friends, whatever it is. Find a community that shares your concerns. Knowing you're not alone makes an enormous difference in your ability to keep going. It's so much easier to be resilient when you know that you're not alone. We need to prepare emotionally. This is likely to be a long fight. And there will be moments when it feels hopeless. I can almost guarantee it. There will be moments when it seems like nothing we do is working. That's when having a support system will be critical. That's when it's so important to have people who remind you why you started. People who encourage you to keep going, who offer you a space to vent and process your frustration. So important. That all goes along with preparing emotionally. But also remember that resistance happens at all levels. Right? Some, like I said, some will be on the front lines. We need people on the front lines. If you have the courage and the ability to be on the front lines, please do so. People are out there risking arrest and physical harm, but there are others. Others will be quietly supporting from the sidelines, and those people are needed as well. Some will be strategists, helping to plan the next moves. Others will be educators, making sure people have the right information. All of those roles matter. No movement, at least no successful movement, survives on bravery alone. It survives on community. Ultimately, courage is also about preparing for what comes next. It's not just about today. Right now, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. But we do have a choice. Right? We can let fear keep us frozen, or we can start preparing now. Like I said, courage, I keep saying it, courage isn't just about the big dramatic moments. Courage is about, it's feeling the fear, feeling overwhelmed, but still taking part in that quiet preparation, the steady resilience, the decision to keep going, even when the road ahead looks completely uncertain. We don't know exactly what's coming next. But we do know this. History belongs to those who refuse to surrender. So let's prepare. Let's build our strength. Let's find our people. Because the fight isn't just about surviving. It's also about shaping what comes after. So we've spent a lot of time talking about courage, and not as some grand heroic display, but as a sustained effort to resist fear, to stay engaged, and to take action where you can. Right? We've explored what it means to balance strategic action with personal safety, right? How to build, we talked about how to build networks of support, and why preparing ourselves mentally and emotionally is just as important as any outward act of defiance. But here's the truth. No one has all the answers right now. I don't have all the answers right now. What I'm sharing with you tonight, I'm sharing things that I have thought through, that I have concluded through my own study and reflection. We are in uncharted territory, at least for us in our times. The rules we thought were firm are shifting beneath us. The safeguards we assumed would protect us seem to be disappearing. The playbook for preserving our democracy and human rights is being rewritten in real time. And the terrifying part, we don't know exactly how this ends. That uncertainty, and it's a real uncertainty, that uncertainty is paralyzing for a lot of people. It's easy to get stuck in a loop of doom scrolling, waiting for the next shoe to drop, right? Hoping that someone else, some leader, some institution, some legal ruling will step in and just set things right. But as history has shown us over and over again, generally waiting for someone else to fix things, that's usually how the worst injustices end up really taking hold. We don't have to have all the answers. Especially in a time of uncertainty like this, rather than being paralyzed, we need to acknowledge the fact that, you know what, we don't have all the answers, and that doesn't fucking matter. We just have to refuse to accept inaction as an option. Inaction. Choosing to put our heads down and do nothing out of fear, that should not be an option that's on the table. Look, there is no one right way to resist what's going on here. There's no singular definition of courage that applies to everyone in every situation. Some of us will be in positions where we can speak out publicly, we can challenge injustice directly, or we can organize protests. Others will need to act more carefully. They will need to support the movement in quieter but equally important ways. Right? Having conversations with family, keeping coworkers informed, offering logistical or financial support to those who are taking bigger risks. All of that is important. You need to remember that. Some of us will work behind the scenes. We will strengthen networks of resistance. Others will be out front, risking their safety for the cause. Some will focus on local change, protecting their communities, advocating for vulnerable neighbors, staying engaged in local politics, while others they'll engage at the national level. They'll push back against systemic injustice. It all matters. So the question isn't whether you're doing enough compared to someone else. The question is, are you doing what you can? If you're choosing to act in ways that fit your circumstances, that protect your ability to stay in the fight long term, then that move, do those things that move us even an inch closer to justice, then you are part of the resistance. But doing nothing is not an option. Courage isn't about fearlessness. I've said that a few times now. So that means that courage really is about action. If you're waiting for the fear to go away before you take action, you'll be waiting forever. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about acting despite fear. It's about looking at everything that could go wrong and saying, I won't let that stop me. Some of the bravest people in history weren't fearless warriors. They were ordinary people who found the strength to resist, even in the smallest ways. So here's my challenge to you. Find one way, just one way to act courageously this week. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be public. But do something. Exercise that courage muscle. Right? Have that difficult conversation with a family member. Support that organization that's out doing important work. Challenge misinformation when you hear it from someone you know. Take one step, just one step, toward building a stronger, more resilient network. Whatever it is, just take action. Because courage isn't just a feeling. Courage is a choice. So make the choice. Also, join the conversation. I'd love to hear from you. How are you showing courage, in the moment? If you're comfortable, you can, go on over to thecodaproject.com, find an appropriate article. I'll be posting things and drop something in the comment, or subscribe to the newsletter and reply to it and let me know. If you'd rather keep it private, then reach out that way and we'll talk about it. But also support each other. If tonight's discussion, if it resonated with you, then take it beyond this space. Encourage your friends, your family, your coworkers. Encourage them to stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, encourage everyone to stay hopeful. It's easy to give into the fear and put your head down and just feel despair, but really try to stay hopeful. I think this is probably the most important episode I've ever done. We are living in a moment where history is being rewritten in real time. The question is, what role will we play in it? Courage isn't just fighting on the front lines. And I wanted to talk about that because I know so many people who are afraid right now because they can't, because of their situation, they can't risk being out in front but there's so much more that they can do. And I know there are others out there who are feeling the same way. I mean, it starts with just choosing not to look away, standing firm in your values and keeping the flame of justice alive, even in these dark times. The world needs every kind of courage right now. So what kind of courage can you choose? I tried to keep this conversation realistic, practical, and urgent, without pushing you into unnecessary risk. I'm one of those people who is at risk. I could have my career ripped away from me at any moment. In fact, it's very likely that my job is at risk. That's why a big part of my goal tonight was to offer up some ideas for strategic resistance, rather than expecting everyone to make bold public stands when that might just not be feasible. So we're going to continue this conversation in the coming weeks, because in light of all the horrible, scary shit that's going on right now, I'm going to explore the Stoic virtues. There's three more, the cardinal virtues. The first was courage, and then there's justice, temperance, and wisdom. Because courage is just one part of the equation. But for now, let's take what we've learned tonight and try to put it into action. Remember my challenge from earlier, right? It's find one act of courage this week. Just one way to act courageously this week. And it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be public. Just do something. All right. Until next time, folks, stay strong, stay smart. Most of all, stay courageous. Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of the MTB podcast. I hope you found these ideas helpful and at least a little bit encouraging. We're living through something that's unprecedented in our lifetime, but it's not completely unprecedented. There's a long history of people who have chosen courage in the face of tyranny, but the thing we need to remember is that it's generally the big, bold, heroic acts that find their way into the history books. And yet we know that for every hero, there were countless other people who were being courageous in the ways that were most appropriate for them and their situation. Those people are the ones who should be the role models for many of us today. As for me, I'll continue to try to provide encouragement and hope through the live streaming, podcasting, and blogging that I do every week. And I'd love for you to join me. Please head over to thecodaproject.com and become a subscriber. In the coming weeks and months, I'll do my best to build a safe and encouraging online community, and I would be honored if you become a part of it. Together, we can build a courageous, values-based movement, and we can help to positively change the world.